thousands of miles from sea to sea, Canada. The eastern gate of this land, 4 Atlantic provinces. The main road through them, the Trans-Canada Highway. Central Canada next, industrial Canada. 2 provinces larger than the whole of Western Europe. West now, the Great Plains and 3 prairie provinces. Finally, through the Rocky Mountains, British Columbia and the Western Sea. A nation of great distances, of enormous diversity. Our journey across it begins in the Atlantic provinces in the east, whose shores are washed by the North Atlantic Ocean. Already 400 years ago, Europeans sailed each summer to these fishing banks off Newfoundland to reap the treasure of the sea. But only a few continued west to settle on the land. When the catch was in, the rest sailed back home to Europe, unattracted by the rugged, forbidding coast that met them. It was easy enough to get to these shores by sea or to penetrate by river, but overland, an almost impossible terrain. And that's the key to a great problem that has always dogged Canada. Almost 5,000 miles separate this Atlantic coast from the Pacific in the west. Unless it be linked by transport overland, it has little real meaning as a nation. Here at St. John's, the capital city of Newfoundland, it used to be said, to live, we look outward to the sea. In the old days, the Newfoundlander had to. In the middle of the 20th century, in the age of motor transport, there was still no road across their own island, let alone across the nation. From St. John's here, there was a railway across the island, but only local roads, leading a few miles into the interior. There were, of course, the cynics who said, why bother building a highway through nowhere? But there were others who said, try building it, and it won't be nowhere any longer. December 10th, 1949, an act to encourage and assist in the construction of a Trans-Canada Highway was passed by Parliament and given royal assent. By agreement reached at a federal-provincial conference, the project will be a 2-lane paved highway. The designated route will be the shortest practical east-west route through each province, consistent with the needs of the provinces and the interests of Canada as a whole. This film is about that road and about places and people and the life it serves. There is traffic now in Newfoundland from the interior down to the sea, not just from the coast ports out into the blue. And the face of Newfoundland is changing. Industrial development, mineral development, expansion in the pulp and paper industry reflect the new surge of life in the interior. For most Newfoundlanders, the sea is still their first love, and a shoal of squid can still be a 9 days wonder, bringing old men and brawny boys to scoop up the prime bait for codfish. People of Canada's Eastern Gate, Canadians by nationality now, but like no other Canadians you'll find along the miles of highway to the west. Newfoundlanders by name, Islanders by nature, British by heritage, people of a rocky heath and a violent sea. Newfoundland, summer. Plunging wave and seabird's cry. An island, but one which now looks towards, not away from that vast stretch of Canada which begins 100 miles away over the Gulf of St. Lawrence. A gentle sea and another lovely island looming, Cape Breton, province of Nova Scotia. The economic heart of this island lies buried deep in the earth, for Cape Breton lives on coal. Men of the night shift toil in dim corridors stretching far out under the bottom of the sea. On the surface, the foundries, melding coke and limestone and iron, pouring good Atlantic steel into molds, and acrid smoke into the summer sky. Coal, steel, and music. You can still hear the soft lilt of the Gaelic spoken here, for most of its people came originally from the Highlands of Scotland. And the Trans-Canada Highway here leads through a landscape of hill and forest and loch, much like that of their ancestral island home. It's somewhat debatable whether Cape Breton is now, strictly speaking, an island. The Strait of Canso, 1 mile wide, used to divide Cape Breton from the mainland of Nova Scotia. It wasn't practical to build a bridge because of the tides and ice jams. But the road must go through, the links must be forged. Here a gigantic link of rock to form the deepest causeway in the world. Ahead, the mainland, a quiet province of farm, forest, fishing ports, orchards, growing cities and industry, and always the sea. Halifax, the capital, is one of the great harbor cities of the world. You could tuck all the world's navies away in Bedford Basin here. A century ago, Halifax used to pride itself on its sailing ships. Now, in an age of aircraft carriers and atomic submarines, the terms are different, but the proud maritime tradition remains at the great Atlantic Naval Base. If you were to ask these Canadians where their grandparents were born, you'd get a lot of answers. Poland, Scotland, Italy, England, Ontario. A few might say simply the island. They don't feel it's necessary to specify Prince Edward Island, as though they mean to say, what other island is there? It's a small province, a little over 100,000 people, but more densely populated than any other. In the main, they are fishermen and farmers. It's odd now to think that this proud little island refused for 5 years to enter Confederation, especially since it was here in the capital, Charlottetown, that a crucial conference was held in 1864. It led to the joining of the separate provinces into a new nation, Canada. The islanders shrewdly kept out of it until they were guaranteed financial support for their railroad. Today, there's another link binding the island to the nation, the Trans-Canada Highway. You can drive directly from the highway onto the car ferry to the mainland. It's called the Abegweit, the old Micmac Indian name for their beautiful island, meaning cradled in the waves. "18 times a day, in summer, the Abegweit churns the 9 miles over the Northumberland Strait to the last of the Atlantic Sea provinces. You can even watch the sea moving in on New Brunswick every day. Not the gentle rise of the tide as elsewhere, but a creeping edge of water at the head of the Bay of Fundy, one of the highest tides in the world. There's talk of harnessing this tide as a source of power, but inland in the meantime, New Brunswick is going ahead with more familiar-looking power developments. Here at Beechwood, for example, as part of the growing industrialization of the province. And up on the St. John River, the Tobique Dam, the spanking new in a province that jealously preserves the old, like this covered bridge at Heartland, longest anywhere. They used to say of the Maritimes, "What's the principal export?" And the rather sardonic answer, "Brains." It's noteworthy that these quiet, undramatic provinces should have sent out to the world so many men of culture, power, eminence in many fields. Not too remarkable, perhaps, for the Maritimers always had a passion for education. Here in the capital city, Fredericton, The university stems from an academy founded by United Empire Loyalists almost 2 centuries ago. But it isn't really the cities that draw the visitor to New Brunswick. In the fishing season, he's almost certainly headed out to the cool pools and riffles of the game rivers with the fabled names. The Miramichi, the Restigouche, the Dungarvan, the Cairns. Creel limit, 30 salmon in any 1 week. Westward now to La Belle Province, as the Quebecer often calls it. And it is beautiful indeed. Placid villages in the sunshine. Scenery on the grand scale here at Percé in the Gaspé, on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And Quebec summer brings back the gannets to nearby Bonaventure Island to breed on the rock face, nourished by the teeming Gulf around them. And everywhere in these green distances, the tourists. For Quebec in many ways is like no other part of North America. Its native-born people in the main speak French. They are descended from adventurous, tough colonizers who pioneered this land more than 3 centuries ago. A fine day for fishing. But Quebec's most important industry can't hold up on that account. North of the river stand more than 100,000 square miles of forest, the raw stuff for wood pulp and paper, an industry linking Quebec to 70 countries all over the world. This pulpwood, 1/7 of the world's production, is cut by the young men deep in the bush in winter. But summer, that's the time, when you come back home to the smiling countryside and your village with the saint's name down by the river. This face of Quebec doesn't change much. Its heart still lies in the family, usually large. And family visits. Uncle Alcide knows all the gossip of the parish. In the school or convent, guardian of the ancestral faith. And finally in the church. And once again, the family. "14 generations of Tremblays have been born in Quebec, for in the New World, Quebec is old and honors the old." Tradition, passed on from father to son still. Handicrafts reflecting long winter evenings of work, little changed from the days of long ago, when the farms were laid out in these long, narrow strips stretching back from the river so that they could dwell close to one another, for sociability in a lonely land, for easier transport by river, and for defense against the Indians. The Indians? Surely it was the British redcoats who won the decisive battle up here near the Plains of Abraham above Quebec City. Of course. But they didn't conquer, didn't even try to conquer, the soul of Quebec. Quebec's civil law is still based on French law, and in the provincial legislative building, most deliberations are conducted in French. Quebec is reputed to be one of the 3 most colorful cities on the continent. It looks different, certainly, and sounds different, and they wouldn't change it for anything. Almost 1,400 miles from the sea at St. John's, where we started. Yet only here do we leave tidewater behind, in the heart of Quebec. Quebec, plain living, wedded to the soil, frugal. But that's only one of the faces of Quebec. Actually, it's the second most heavily industrialized of all the provinces. About 160 miles westward, on an island in the St. Lawrence River, is the largest, liveliest city in Canada, Montreal. Over 1.5 million people live in Greater Montreal, and it is the second largest French language city in the world, next to Paris. Montreal lives on heavy industry, finance, railroads, trade, which is more fun if you can do it yourself at the Bon Secours market. But most importantly, Montreal lives because it handles most of the export and import business of the country. Canada has the largest per capita trade of any country in the world. There are miles of busy waterfront because it's on the St. Lawrence Seaway, at the foot of a great network of rivers, lakes, and canals. "1,500 miles from the open ocean, Montreal is one of the great ports of the world. It's about 120 miles west out of Montreal that the Trans-Canada Highway merges into the road system of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, the nation's capital. It is capital of a sovereign state which has a land area greater than that of any other country in the world except the Soviet Union. Yet it's a quiet city generally after Montreal, except when the House of Commons is in session. Its most colorful aspect is provided by embassies and legations from all over the world. Canada is assuming an important role in the community of nations. And of course it's the home of Parliament, the Commons with 265 elected members, and the appointed Senate. All government departments have their headquarters here. More than 50% of adult Ottawans are employees of the Crown, though some don't correspond to the usual picture of the civil servant. Here at the National Research Council, for one example, they've pioneered in developing cancer therapy units which use radioactive cobalt for hospitals at home and abroad. And at the main atomic research laboratories, 100 miles northwest of Ottawa, there is now one of the world's most versatile atomic research tools, the NRU reactor, atomic energy in the service of life. From the capital, the Trans-Canada swings out west across central Ontario to Peterborough, an industrial city which still manages to remain beautiful, with its famous hydraulic locks. They can raise a boat 65 feet above the level of the Trent Valley Canal. Summertime and everybody's out. The perfect time of year to be on the move. Suppose we leave the highway now and jump from Peterborough 300 miles southwest to the border. There, across the river, is the skyline of Detroit, USA. This side of the river, the industrial city, Windsor, Canada. Here we see another aspect of the Trans-Canada system. Over the bridge at Windsor and at 100 other entry points, on a border 4,000 miles long, streams each year more than twice the total population of Canada. They move north on provincial highways that connect with the Trans-Canada, but on the way there's a lot to see and listen to. Down in the heart of southwestern Ontario, there's the quiet little city with the familiar name, Stratford, with its own river, Avon, and its own summer Shakespeare Festival, one of the big yearly theatrical events in North America. Stratford, Ontario has become famous, though perhaps not yet as famous as Niagara Falls, about 70 miles away. Beautiful indeed, but a nightmare for early navigators. Now, the lake freighters glide through a 25-mile-long bypass, the Welland Canal, linking Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. A lot of tonnage moves through this region. Grain, coal, iron ore. Much of this traffic is headed for a city lying below the escarpment at the foot of Lake Ontario, the rugged center of Canada's steel production, Hamilton. hard to imagine that only 15 miles away lie the lush orchards and vineyards of Niagara under the sun. Green and pleasant country this, along the Queen Elizabeth Way, which leads you into what you might call car country. The automobile industry is one of the largest buyers and sellers of goods in industrial Canada. An automobile contains more than 12,000 parts, and these parts contain in one form or another almost every raw material the country produces. There is now one car for every 4 Canadians, second highest rate in the world. 100 years ago, home was your own village. Today, in a real sense, home to Canadians is becoming the whole country. One reason being the ubiquitous car. Toronto, the capital of Ontario, is home to more than 1 million people. Until recent times, Toronto was thought of as a rather fussy old lady among cities, standing foursquare for business, respectability, and no nonsense. The business part of it still holds true. It's vying with Montreal for the lead as Canada's financial center. Its industrial and commercial expansion has been enormous. But there's a new tempo to life now. Perhaps it was always there underneath. Toronto has long supported the frivolities of the biggest annual fair in the world, the Canadian National Exhibition. The exhibition has its serious side, of course, but most people will still take in the grandstand show with its daredevils turning gaudy old crates into scrap for the steel industry. On a fine day, more than 250,000 visitors will flock to the X, symbol of that other face of Toronto, a city of color, entertainment center of English-speaking Canada. It's not far from the bustling life of southern Ontario to a vast land of quietness. Clear lake, smell of the pines in the sun, rock, and good fishing. Almost 1,000 miles of it split Canada in two. When the railroad long ago was pushed through this country, as the highway is being pushed today, all they were trying to do was to get through it, to link the rich East with the potentially rich West. But the picks of the builders hit rock that wasn't always barren. Nickel, copper, uranium, gold, iron. Here at Sudbury, a weird procession against the sky. The slag dumps of the nickel smelters reflect a gigantic mineral storehouse that lies beneath the surface of a beautiful region once thought useful only to the fisherman, trapper, or painter. Rushing waters, flowing grain. About 400 miles west of Sudbury, Fort William and Port Arthur at the lakehead. Port Arthur is a funnel through which pour oceans of grain. When When they built that railway through nowhere, they were gambling that the vast, then almost empty western wilderness would prove abidingly fruitful. Today, Winnipeg. September and the yards tight with traffic. Its people make Winnipeg a highly cosmopolitan community. On this side of the river, the early settlers came from the British Isles. Over in St. Boniface, they are mainly French-Canadian in origin. Now added, people of every nationality in Europe. There are 19 foreign language papers published here. Chinese, German, Ukrainian, Polish, Icelandic, Canada's mixture of peoples in little. It can be mighty cold here at the corner of Portage and Main in January, but summertime, it's wonderful. Of all the year, prairie folk remember late summer weather best. Smoky early mornings and shining afternoons. A world of green and gold and blue and distances. Everything ripe for the harvest. Nowadays, it's not all grain, of course. Pierre de La Vérendrye and the other voyagers who first looked out over this ample land 2 centuries ago followed the old Indian trails and the rivers. Today, ribbons of hardtop stretch from horizon to horizon over the prairie land. Trans-Canada Highway construction standards. Surface, 3 inches deep minimum, with gravel or cut stone base. Hard surfaced. Gravel shoulders of 10 feet maximum height. Sight distance at least 600 feet in either direction. Hills graded to not more than 8%. Maintenance responsibility of the provinces, except in areas designated as national parks. First of all the provinces to complete its part of the Trans-Canada Highway was Saskatchewan, capital city Regina, in the heart of the wheat belt. You don't ordinarily associate water sports with southern Saskatchewan, for after all, this is prairie, grain country. Spring rains, hot summer sun, dry windy days, cool nights. That's what pushes up out of these infinite plains, the best wheat in the world, #1 Northern. Times have changed on the prairies since the days when late August brought the famous old harvest excursions, thousands of men from as far away as the Maritimes, for a month of hectic toil and one big blowout in town before heading back east. Today looks easy. Of course, mechanization demands vast quantities of fuel. dramatic development on the prairies at mid-century is the tremendous growth of the western oil fields. There's oil in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but the center of the industry is in the province of Alberta. In this age of motorized transport, Canada, until recently, had to import almost all her oil requirements. Today she produces most of her own needs. Pipelines carrying crude oil and natural gas from the vast underground pools now reach to the Pacific coast and eastern Canada, and a great chemicals industry based on it is growing up. The center of it all in the west is Edmonton, about 200 miles north of the Trans-Canada by provincial highway. Only 70 years ago, a remote frontier trading post, Edmonton has boomed. Among other things, it's a great transportation center, for it is the gateway to the Northwest. You can drive from here clear up to Fairbanks via the Alaska Highway. But we're going south now. Behind us now, the grain country, the oil country. Behind us, the clank and roar of machinery. It's quiet in the foothills of the Rockies, the rancher's land. It's a way of life not changed much in 100 years. Its wealth is still on the hoof, though the buffalo herds have given way to what will be prime western beef. The West here is still vivid with memories of other times. The days before trails became highways, before campsites became cities like Calgary. This dignified-looking city, now a financial center, hasn't quite forgotten the roaring whoop-up days when it was the last frontier, about as far west as you could go without bumping into a mountain. About 60 miles west of Calgary, the Great Barrier of the Rockies. There are ways into it, of course. To get to the resort town of Banff, the highway simply follows the valley of the Bow River. This is a land of breathtaking grandeur. Much of it has been set aside as national parks to remain in perpetuity pretty well as nature intended. Rigidly protected for many years, the animals have lost all fear of humans, those harmless creatures who spend all their time taking pictures. The buffalo, remnants of the fantastic herds of the past. Each company still has its patriarchal bull. In these easy times, he's not above hemming it up a little. The moose simply ignore you. The Trans-Canada Highway here leads you through 4 of Canada's national parks: Yoho, Banff, Glacier, and Mount Revelstoke. The Great Divide, the watershed. On one side, the rivers flow north and east. On the other side, they lead us west to the Pacific. Here in British Columbia, the problems facing the highway builder were enormous. Trans-Canada standards demand all hills graded to not more than 8%. The road must in places be made to cling safely to a mountainside without danger of snow or rock slide. Yet when you've got your stretch finished, it's worth it, leading you down into the beautiful green valleys. From Revelstoke, you can loop south to the city of Trail. It's the center of one of the great mining areas of the world. Silver, lead, zinc. And its smelters are the biggest in Canada, for there is wealth as well as beauty in these hills. Trail lies just north of the United States border. It's surprising now to remember that a century ago, some of our ancestors wanted to give up the struggle for independence and throw in their lot with the Americans. The orchard man in the Okanagan Valley of BC would wonder about that today, for this land of Canada has been good to him, a rich and fruitful land. Yet the fact remains that geographically, the natural, economic, and transportation lines do run north and south. It once seemed a quixotic vision which insisted, we'll make those lines run east and west. We'll make these varied, separated regions into a nation despite geography. We'll link them, by railroad, by road. We'll make them one. Rugged machines dwarfing rugged men, the road builders. It's 550 twisting miles from the Great Divide down to the Pacific shore. Snaking through the valleys, sliding along the rock face, it's hard to imagine now the men who pushed the steel through this country in the 80s. most of the work done by man's sinew and muscle alone. No giant trucks, no bulldozers in their day. That was long before the age of motor transport cut its own path through these wild gorges. Down the path of the rivers, the highway runs. The icy blue-green of the Thompson, fed on the mountain snows, merges near Lytton with the silty gray-brown of the Fraser from the ranch lands and the Caribou. River flow, rock flow. Hundreds of thousands of tons of rock to shore up the last buttresses of the highway through the green canyons. And one day, it's through. Down through the valley of the Fraser, into a gentler land. Down to the pine stands, to Canada's third largest city, Vancouver. There are many sources for the vitality of this city: fish, lumber, art, packing houses, a great university, shipping to the Orient, to New Zealand, to Australia. Your ship to Vancouver Island passes the lumbermen in the bay. On the moist western slopes of the mountains here, the cedars grow big. And down by the waterfront in summer, always the smell of timber seasoning in the sun. More than half of Canada's sawn lumber is milled in BC. The sea now. You head out across the Strait of Georgia by car ferry to join the last link of the Trans-Canada Highway at Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, about 40 miles west. Ahead of you lies the long famous Malahat Drive down the island to Victoria, the capital. But first you can see the 1,000-year-old trees of the rainforest in Cathedral Grove. Magnificent country, something like Scotland. And Victoria, with its gentle climate, is something like the south coast of England. And then you remember, perhaps, this is part of Canada. This is part of a famous union. Many climates, many peoples, different tongues. Here at Victoria, you remember you're almost 5,000 miles from that Newfoundland shore with which it is linked. You remember Quebec, the prairies, the North Woods country, joined together to form a new nation which isn't really like any other. It's Canada.